Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today.
Welcome to GSMC, America's Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alyssa Jo. Hello, everybody. How's it going today? I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. Happy Monday. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. I had such a relaxing weekend. I was hanging out with my family and getting some things done and catching up on some much needed sleep. So I feel rested and good and ready to share all these feel-good, positive stories with you. Like always, I have lots of good ones that are sure to up your mood if you're kind of having a blah kind of Monday. I love that one of my episodes come out on Mondays because people always hate Mondays, and I love Mondays, but I think it's just because, we're tired. We just had the weekend. We wish we had a 3-day weekend instead of a 2-day weekend, and you just kind of got to drag your butt to work or to any kind of responsibilities that you have. So I feel like Mondays are always just looked down upon, but I hope that if you're having a rough Monday or you're feeling stressed out or a little anxious or whatever the case is, that this episode is here to help uplift you, bring you positive vibes, good thoughts, just make you feel good, because that's exactly what this podcast is for. So I'm going to stop rambling on. I'm going to, first of all, share some of the stories that I have to share with you today. I have a pandemic love story. If you're a sucker for a good love story like I am, you're going to want to stick around to closer to the end of the episode, because I will share this pandemic love story, and it is a good one, I promise. I also have a positive stories about the fires that have been burning in Sierra Nevada and Cascade Mountain ranges in California and Oregon. So yes, there is a positive thing about that. So don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss that. I've got good things about the environments, new scientific discoveries. I have kids doing amazing things, all the regular feel-good stories that I usually have for you. But today's a good one. So I will stop rambling on, like I said, and I will jump right into these feel-good, positive stories to hopefully uplift your Monday. Well, the first story I want to share with you is about a new discovery, and scientists are very excited because they have made a breakthrough when it comes to type 2 diabetes, and is the first ever glimpse at how protein behind type 2 diabetes works. So it's officially been caught in the act, is what they're saying, and it could lead to this huge breakthrough in treatment, okay? So more than 400 million people live with diabetes around the world. I did not know this. And the majority have type 2 diabetes. And this is develops when the body cannot produce enough insulin, or when the insulin produced does not work properly, right? So basically, it's a fiber-like structure that is the hallmark for type 2 diabetes is amyloid fibrils. I'm probably not saying it right, but it has now been observed for the first time by scientists, and it's this new 2020 study that was just published in Nature Structural and Molecular Biology. So amyloid fibrils are produced from what they call clumps of the peptide protein amylin, which regulates the body's glucose levels. So this study from the professor Neil Ranson of University of Leeds, he says that this finding is really exciting because it is a crucial in understanding the disease process with these structures that we're getting the first glimpse at what might be going on. And the latest electron microscope technology, known as cyroelectron microscopy was used to visualize the structure of the fibers, and protein samples were frozen and then analyzed to a resolution where individual atoms can be observed. So people with early onset type 2 diabetes have a specific genetic variant of amyloid fibrils known as S20G. And the researchers compared S20G with amyloid fibrils found in the general population, which they call the wild type. So how amyloid molecules stack up to form fibrils was observed by analyzing thousands of different images. So the molecules formed integrate structures just kind of like rungs in a ladder. This is what the researchers found. And the wild type fibrils, however, had 2 copies of amyloid per run. So whereas some of the S20G had 3. So this is suggesting that these fibrils can form templates onto which more copies of amyloid can lock. So it would also explain why the S20G variant protein lumps together more quickly and why it is linked to the rapid onset of type 2 diabetes. So the co-author, Professor Sheena Radford of the Abstory Center, also added that the breakthrough is important not just for the understanding of amylin, but for understanding many amyloid diseases in which run fibril formation occurs. So the buildup of these amyloid fibrils is also linked to other diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and Huntington's disease. So this could not just better type 2 diabetes treatment, but also other diseases as well. So there's my positive scientific discovery for you today. Now the story that I want to share with you is a pretty cool thing about what a startup company has created. And they've created a tool that maps every California tree to help predict fire spread. So it's a new state-of-the-art satellite imaging program, and it's going to allow California fire authorities to map every individual tree in the state as a means to better plan and monitor for the fires. So the fires that, have been in the last few seasons in California's forests have had scientists kind of brainstorming new and better ways to try to combat them. And one effort from this startup company is called SALO Sciences. They're called the California Forest Observatory, CFO, and it uses satellites and AI to create a map covered in small green points. And each of these points represents a real tree, which together represents one of the most ultra-detailed satellite pictures of the Earth's surface available. Crazy. So this will allow wildfire authorities to predict and plan where fires are starting, where they might be headed, and how damaging they might become using information like wind speed and direction, and canopy height and ground vegetation cover. So lots of factors into it. So the CFO creates these pictures from a string of 100 bread loaf-sized satellite cameras managed by a private company formed by NASA scientists, and that company is called Planet. So spinning in a line around the Earth, they act in unison, like a barcode scanner of our planet's surface. Isn't that so interesting? And then it's taking images at 3 meters per pixel, an order of magnitude higher than those taken from larger, older satellites. So the satellites are then aided by LiDAR, a laser technology that gathers the information, and it's mounted on a plane. And then before both streams of data are fed into a deep learning algorithm, which determines things like tree height. Lots of scientific things here. So the co-founder and CEO of SALO Sciences, his name is David Martin, and he knows that there is nothing on Earth like it, and there's no traditional use of LiDAR. So it's mounted on a low-flying aircraft is a very slow and expensive process. So a trip to one of the national parks teaches you that California's forests evolved to regularly catch fire, and that some trees actually need fire to remain healthy. So the reality is that the California fire authorities became so good at quickly extinguishing bushfires that over time, the smaller vegetation growing between the trees that would normally burn fast and at low temperatures began to grow larger and live on. So as climate change has made California's summers hotter and drier, the fires that now race through these masses of small vegetation can damage even the trees that have evolved to protect themselves from the fire. So they're saying that if these fires didn't have continuously dense fuels to burn, it would be much more difficult for them to get out of control. So this is what we saw was was a major problem. What we wanted to tackle was how do we get at identifying the areas to begin treating and removing these overgrown forests? So with the CFO being updated at the end of every fire season, sometimes even more often than that, depending on what kind of season it is, these little tinder boxes will be found much sooner, and then it's preventing a simple bushfire from turning into a raging, massive fire that does so much more damage. So there you have it. It is a very positive story about the fires, and it doesn't just end there. I have another really, really cool story about the fires specifically and what it has actually done in a positive way for animals, okay? And this really just shows nature's resiliency, and I'm super excited to share it with you. I also, speaking of climate change within this past story, I also have another story about climate change that you're not going to want to miss either. So it's time for a little break, but when we get back, I will share those 2 stories with you, plus many more feel-good positive stories. So stay tuned, don't go anywhere, I will be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to GSMC, America's Still Beautiful podcast. I am your host, Alyssa Jo. Hello. We are back from the break, and I'm going to just jump right back into these feel-good, positive stories for you. So we were just talking about fires in general, well, in California, and that scientific discovery that they had to try to monitor the trees and the fires and try to get a handle on it. But with all of that being said, there is some positive things that did happen from the burning in Sierra Nevada and the Cascade Mountain ranges in California and Oregon. And it is specifically for the native black-backed woodpecker. And this is an endangered woodpecker, and it's basically making a comeback because of these fires. Okay, so they are relentlessly drilling holes in the sides of fire-hardened trees in pursuit of insects, and then they create ready-made shelters for dozens of different animal species who eat fire-retardant plant seeds and distribute them hither and yon in their droppings, allowing the forest to regenerate. So this amazing thing is just one of the entire web of plant and animal species who have evolved around the necessity of seasonal fires. So the woodpecker deliberately seeks fire-damaged forests out in search of their favorite food, which is the larvae of the black fire beetle, which have evolved heat-sensing organs to find which trees are still warm from fires to lay their eggs in. So crazy. But both of these species have evolved to interact with the pine forests of the northwestern United States, where the trees have thick coatings of resin-soaked bark that protect them from the high-intensity blazes. So they're saying that woodpeckers are ecosystem engineers. And they are saying that they tracked the black-backed woodpeckers in the forest of the Cascade Range, where this year's fires have burned catastrophically, right? So they have been tracking that, and they say that many small animals, from chipmunks to flying squirrels to mountain bluebirds and wood ducks, compete for the woodpecker's vacated nest because they are so protected from the elements and other predators, and we wouldn't have swallows, swifts, or bats without the woodpeckers. So out of the 180 species of woodpeckers on Earth, the black-backed is not only the one who has adapted to thrive in these forests, but the red-cocked woodpecker is a fire specialist living in the opposite corner of the U.S. from the black-backed, and it relies on low-intensity burns through the undergrowth of the longleaf pine forests of the southeast and mid-Atlantic. And so this fire-loving woodpecker also disappeared after clear-cutting logging reduced its home range from Texas in the west to Florida in the south to New Jersey in the north to just 3% of its original forest cover. Crazy. But just like the phoenix bird rises from the ashes, its listing as one of the first additions to the Endangered Species Act that saw the red-cocked come back from the population collapse that most scientists concurred would have led to extinction. So 39 separate recovery populations have increased their numbers by 40%, and an updated recovery plan is being formulated with the aim of a potential removal from the list. Exciting. So just like the black-bed woodpecker, the red-cocked population creates thousands of nesting cavities in trees, with all manner of animals compete to occupy after the bird abandons them. So right now, there's 27 species of vertebrates, as well as many invertebrates, have been found living in these small hollows. And with the collapse of the red-cocked population, the longleaf pine forest experienced a real estate crisis. So this is compounded by the fact that this particular woodpecker creates their hollows in living, not dead, trees, a task that requires immense time and labor that the bird will leave the nest to its descendants, much the way that humans with their houses. So just like humans, and therefore they don't produce more than a few in their lifetime. So this task actually requires a particular tree, and males and their offspring have been known to continuously inhabit the same tree hollow for 30 years. And the typical tree is a pine of 75 years or older. So it's large enough to contain a hollow for several birds. And these kind of trees grow in forests created by low-intensity fires. So that's the kind that were deliberately set by Native Americans hundreds of years ago, and the kind which forest managers today have had to set as a part of the red-cocked recovery plan, which also included drilling artificial nesting holes, which they would almost always occupy. So now this discovery that was made in the 80s by a scientist at the Virginia Polytechnic Institute would become an invaluable strategy after Hurricane Hugo obliterated 90% of the longleaf pine forest in South Carolina's Francis Marion National Forest. So like a woodpecker version of Katrina, basically, they're saying that 475 breeding woodpecker couples lost their homes. So to give them a helping wing, they say the Forest Service drilled 2,800 holes in remaining trees. Now, they say that South Carolina now has over 1,400 clusters of woodpeckers, and where there were 1,900 cavity trees prior to Hugo, there are 5,800 today. And areas of the state that haven't seen birds in over 4 decades now have them moving in. So they will always need burns and artificial nesting holes, and the woodpecker, like the black-backed, are examples of how resilient nature really is, and that even a blazing forest is used by species to flourish, whether it's for food or shelter. See, you can always find a positive thing in anything. You can find a positive standpoint. Okay, now I did promise another story about climate change, and a group of U.S. Senate Republicans have authored an amendment to an energy and manufacturing bill that would launch a transition away from hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, which is a class of chemical refrigerant that is considered a potent greenhouse gas. So it was introduced by Senate Environment and Public Works Committee Chairman, and they're saying that it amends the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act of 2019 to require the reduction of production and consumption of HFCs by 30% every 4 years until 2036. So used in home and office conditioners across the country, HFCs produce a greenhouse gas effect that many hundreds of times stronger than CO2. While they were originally created to replace another chemical coolant that was found to deplete the ozone layer, they've now been singled out as a powerful driver of climate crisis. So president and CEO of the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute, his name is Stephen Urek, and he says, this amendment brings us one step closer to implementing an HFC phase down and reaping the substantial economic benefits associated with this transition to new refrigerant technologies. So they are also saying that the AHRI is just one of a handful of think tanks like the National Association of Manufacturers and corporations like Honeywell that believe that this transition from HFCs would not only help the environment, but also allow a new dimension of market innovation and competition to spur growth in a sector that Congress describes as contributing almost $200 billion annually to the economy through the employment of almost 800,000 people. So all 197 member states of the UN already ratified the 1987 Montreal Protocol on ozone depleting substances, and 102 have signed on to the 2016 Kegel Amendment that added HFCs to the list of controlled substances after they were found to have a very high global warming potential. So there's a sense that if the U.S. aligns its policy with the Kigali Amendment, it will make the economy more competitive abroad, since the removal of HFCs from American-made goods would allow more products to be exported to countries already in line with Kigali. So the Montreal Protocol is one of the United Nations' true success stories, with the world having phased out about 98% of all ozone-depleting substances to repair that ozone hole that restored the Earth's UV sun shield, which is, of course, essential to our health. So the ozone layer restoration has prevented an estimated 2 million deaths a year from skin cancers like melanoma and 135 million gigatons of CO2 and equivalents from entering the atmosphere. So the bill is still in committee, but with Republican support, it stands a decent chance of passing the Republican-controlled Senate when it comes up for a vote later this year, with the GOP author John Barrasso hoping to pass it quickly to the president's desk before Congress adjourns in January. Pretty exciting stuff. I love positive things about the climate change. So there you have it. All right, it's time for another break, but don't go anywhere. I still haven't shared with you that pandemic love story. I also have a very interesting health tip that says a new study. You may have heard of this health tip, but I'm going to teach you how to do it yourself. So just stick around. You're not going to want to miss it. I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to GSMC, America's Still Beautiful podcast. We're in the last stretch of today's episode, so I will jump right in, try to share as many stories as I can with you in this time frame. So I mentioned a health tip, but for several years from now, you've probably heard of this, okay? But the collagen-rich bone broth that is created by boiling bones to extract the gelatin and marrow within. it's becoming very popular on the health and wellness magazine circuit, actually. And it's for a really good reason. So I thought I would share this new study that they came out with it. And it's a very simple dish, and it basically confers a set of valuable nutrients like the glutamine and collagen that are uncommon in other foods. And they're saying that animal bones are also rich in calcium, magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, and other trace minerals that help build and strengthen our own human bones. So bone broth almost promotes gut and digestive health, supports joint mobility, skin, hair, teeth, and nails, and even better sleep, which of course is essential to your overall health. So there's other health benefits that include an improved immune system and faster muscle recovery, both very important. But it's made simply by boiling the bones of animals, and it's always referred to as bone broth, right? And there's, a meaningful difference between it and the cooking stock our mothers use as the base for chicken noodle soup when we were sick. The answer is actually very important because there are likely many people who could benefit tremendously from bone broth's health benefits, but can't afford to buy health food store prices. So they're saying that it is so essential for your health, and they want you to be making it yourself for just an overall benefit for your health, right? Because we need these minerals in our body. So good bone broth should have higher amounts of protein and sodium and small amounts of calcium and potassium. This is likely, it indicates the presence of collagen and glutamine, which is where the health benefits really are. So here are some tips that the health and the study that gave us to make your own. So bone broth is very easy to make. It only requires a little bit of intuition and common sense. So it says, ask your local butcher if he has bones to get rid of or that he would consider selling at a low price. Bones on the legs, feet, and spine of a cow or chicken will have greater densities of marrow and gelatin and should be preferred to other kinds. They say use any leftovers you have from any animal. If you're buying bone in meats, see about getting those with larger bones. And they say use vegetables and especially herbs to give it a bit of flavor and stop your broth from tasting like crystal. Yes, yeah, doesn't always taste the best. So they say use a pan with a lid. And they say you likely don't want your house to smell like bone broth, so make sure you use the lid. So there's your tips on optimizing your health with your bone broth. Now, I mentioned some kids doing amazing thing, and I have one particular kid in general. Her name is Lucy Stimson, and she is a Girl Scout, and she just won the Gold Award, which is the highest award a Girl Scout can earn. It requires about 80 hours of volunteering to create a sustainable difference in the community. And what she did was start a Facebook page, and it's called Making a Stress-Free Breakthrough. She's been regularly posting tips since April, and this is, wasn't just because of the pandemic. She wanted to do this in general, and this page features different ways to reduce your stress, topics ranging from meditation, mindfulness, pep talks. There's fun videos involved. She recently included a stress workshop guidebook containing a variety of activities, and then she also posted a homemade coloring book, an animal crossword puzzle, just really helpful things to help you reduce your stress. So if you want to check out that Facebook page, it is called Making a Stress-Free Breakthrough. She also has a website as well. So she's gone above and beyond, but it's so cool to see this young girl just want to help her community. And her website is the Stress Busting website, it's called, and she was saying that the project has helped me by opening up to my family about mental health. I found it in myself to tell my parents about my stress and anxiety. I have been using some of the techniques to calm myself when I get overly stressed, and this has helped me to put what I have been feeling into perspective and to ask for help. So go check out her Facebook page or her website if you want some awesome stress-reducing tips from a very smart Girl Scout. Now, like I promised, I do have a story about the love story, okay? And I will share that with you now as a pandemic love story. So it was an American man, and in November of 2019, he says, I saw my immediate future as I had known it for several years. After working for 10 months, stashing away some money, it was time to travel the world. So this is what he says. He says, arriving in Namibia in December to trek among the dunes, I met an intriguing Italian woman, always with 3 young black children fitting about her. It was for their diversion that one morning on the beaches of the city of Swakopmund, and she asked if I would have dinner with the four of them. This dinner consisted of a bizarre cast of characters and led to a strange enough little game of flirtation between she and I that I eventually followed the fourth of them back to capital of Windhoek. So, she says the woman, her name is Mara, and began visiting Namibia after she became a sponsor, contributing money for school and living expenses through a remote adoption program 4 years prior. She had been making annual visits there to visit the kids, Barack, Augusto, and Atali. There was a strength in the way she cared for those children who were not hers and whom she saw so irregularly. It drew me to her, such that when she invited me to visit her in Italy, she had only to wait 37 hours before a picture of my flight receipt arrived in our WhatsApp chat. How cute is this already? So then he says, the story of Mara and I will always remain inevitably linked to the now infamous virus for several important reasons. But when I arrived in the Milan airport on January the 15th, the rumor of a new SARS epidemic in China could not have been less interesting to me. More interesting was the fact that Mara, a disciplined Italian lawyer, welcomed a vagabonding American writer wearing jungle clothes whose boots hung by their laces from his rucksack. And this recipe for a relationship disaster took a turn for the even less advisable when they immediately moved in together in a studio apartment in a small village around 45 minutes from Milan. Things progressed tentatively until they planned a spontaneous trip to Venice, arriving on the 28th of February, the opening day of Carnival, the theme of which was love, games, and folly. As colored barges floated fire and acrobats down the canals, I felt like 2020 would be a really amazing year. And then COVID-19 hit. A group of tourists had just arrived from China in the infamous carrying SARS-CoV-2, which torched a devastating pandemic that spread throughout Italy like a California wildfire. My friends, neighbors, and Mara's family all went through several stages of denial, noting that most of those dead were very old people or those with cancer. My neighbor Carlo added that the average of age patients who died from COVID-19 was higher than the average age of death among Italians. But it became worse and worse, and slowly the reality sunk in that this was not something the old, dysfunctional, inhibited Italian bureaucracy was capable of containing. And so some of the strictest quarantine measures on earth came down upon us, right as my tourist visa was expiring. 2, unnerved by tales of 3.4% mortality rate to buy a plane ticket home, I remained in Italy until I got it so bad, even in the countryside, we were prohibited from going 200 meters beyond our front door. Bilbo would be appalled, while masks were required at all times, even in the middle of an open field. Our proximity forced us to learn to understand one another, but I remember one monumental fight where I was certain that it was over, only to open my laptop and discover I could not continue my travels. I could go nowhere, since nowhere was operating flights to and from Italy. The storm would eventually pass, but meanwhile Mara and I, unlike many of her silver clients who had sought divorce during the lockdown, had grown closer. What was required when trapped all day at home during a quarantine isn't so different from what is required to forge a healthy marriage, I reckon. COVID-19 created and enforced the conditions for our love to grow in a partnership that is now pending international recognition. At this time of writing this, an uptick of summer holidaying across the country, specifically the reopening of nightclubs, brought about a small outbreak in Sardinia of around 270 cases, which swelled the national number of new cases to around 1,500 per day, but little else in the country of 60 million. The once empty streets of places like Verona, Naples, and Milan are bustling with shoppers, diners, and travelers from all across Europe. Life has returned to normal. Mara and I got married in her hometown on the August 31st, and with airline tickets ready to visit my Virginia home for my brother's wedding in October, and again at Christmas. 2020 will be, for me personally, a year that will be very hard to beat. I had to share that with you, first of all, because I'm a sucker for love stories, but I just think it's a positive thing about the pandemic, right? They met at such a crazy time. They had to stay together because the pandemic literally forced them to. And now they're happily married and in love and planning a trip back to his hometown. And it just makes my heart happy. Love positive stories about the pandemic. Well, there you have it. That is all the information I have for you on today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to GSMC, America's Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alyssa Jo, and I so appreciate you being here. So please do not forget to hit that subscribe button, to like and follow us on social media, and leave a 5-star review. I look forward to sharing more positive, feel-good stories with you next time. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows. From the GSMC Podcast Network, from social media news to marketing news, and even weird news, the GSMC Podcast Network has you covered. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast.